This September, in a lecture hall at the Universidad Carlos III in Getafe, Princess Leonor is going to sit down and, for the first time in a formal academic setting, study something her family has spent nearly 50 years being extremely careful about. It's not a secret document. It's not a classified file. Its history, specifically the history of the Spanish Civil War, the Franco dictatorship that followed it, and the fragile, negotiated transition that eventually put her own family back on the throne. Her confirmed political science curriculum at Carlos III includes history as a core subject, alongside Spanish politics, European politics, political behavior, law, economics, and international relations, a full academic engagement with exactly the period that Spain, as a country, and her family, as an institution, have spent decades trying not to look at too closely. So let's talk about why that period has been treated with so much caution for so long, and why the fact that Leonor is about to study it formally, in an ordinary classroom, next to classmates who owe her no deference, is a genuinely significant moment. To understand why this history carries so much weight, you have to understand the specific and uncomfortable thread that connects Francisco Franco directly to Leonor's own family sitting on the throne today. Franco ruled Spain as dictator following his victory in the Civil War, and in 1969, he formally designated Juan Carlos de Borbón, Leonor's great-grandfather, as his successor, with the explicit title of king. That's not incidental family trivia. It means the legal chain that eventually restored the Spanish monarchy runs directly through a decision made by the dictator himself, not through some clean continuation of pre-Civil War constitutional monarchy. Juan Carlos, once in power after Franco's death in 1975, became the central figure in dismantling that same dictatorship and steering Spain toward democracy, a genuinely remarkable pivot that earned him enormous credit for decades. But the origin point remains what it is. The monarchy Leonor will eventually lead exists, in a very literal legal sense, because Franco put it there. That complicated origin is a large part of why Spain, as a whole, developed what historians and journalists have long called the Pacto del Olvido, the Pact of Forgetting, an informal, widely observed agreement across the political spectrum during the transition to democracy to avoid dwelling publicly on the Civil War and the dictatorship's crimes, in the interest of national reconciliation and a peaceful transfer to democratic government. It worked, in the sense that Spain's transition avoided the kind of violent upheaval many feared. But it also meant that for decades, an entire generation of Spaniards grew up with remarkably thin formal education on exactly this period. Academic studies of Spanish primary and secondary school textbooks have repeatedly found that Civil War and Francoism content was often minimized, compressed, or treated with notable caution compared to other major events in Spanish history, tucked into a small number of course years rather than integrated throughout the curriculum the way the period's importance might otherwise warrant. For the royal family specifically, that caution has carried extra weight, for obvious reasons. Every time Juan Carlos or Felipe has had to publicly reference the Civil War or the Franco years, the language has been careful, general, focused on reconciliation and moving forward rather than on assigning blame or dwelling on specifics. That's not unreasonable given the family's position, but it does mean that Leonor has grown up inside an institution that treats this specific slice of Spanish history as something to be gestured at respectfully rather than examined in detail. Her own schooling reinforced a version of this pattern in its own way. She attended Colegio Santa María de las Rosales in Madrid, the same school her father attended, before finishing her final 2 years at UWC Atlantic College in Wales, an international school built around its own distinct curriculum, one not centered on Spanish national history in the way a standard Spanish secondary curriculum would be. Her subsequent 3 years were consumed entirely by military formation across the Army, Navy, and Air Force. At no point in that path was she required to sit in a classroom and academically dissect the Civil War, the dictatorship, or the mechanics of the transition that eventually made her family's current position possible. That changes this September, and it changes in a specific, structurally important way. She won't be receiving this material through a palace-curated briefing or a tutor selected for discretion. She'll be getting it from Carlos III's standard political science faculty, following, according to the royal household's own confirmed statement, the exact same curriculum as every other student enrolled in the program, no private track, no separate syllabus. That means she'll be reading the same historiography, sitting through the same lectures, and very possibly participating in the same seminar discussions as classmates who have no institutional stake in softening how that history gets discussed. Political science programs in Spain don't typically treat the Civil War and Francoism as a footnote. They treat it as foundational to understanding the country's entire modern political structure, including, unavoidably, the constitutional monarchy she's set to inherit. There's something worth sitting with in the fact that this is happening now, at this specific moment in her life, rather than earlier or later. She's completing this academic transition just weeks after finishing her military formation, just as she formally becomes an adult member of the institution she's studying, in a country where public opinion on the monarchy itself remains close to evenly split, according to polling like the University of Murcia's widely cited study putting support at roughly 48.5% against a 51.5% preference for a republic. Studying the mechanics of how her family's institution actually came to exist, dictatorship, succession law, negotiated transition and all, isn't happening in a vacuum. It's happening as she's about to become one of the most visible public arguments for that institution's continued relevance. Whatever she takes from those lectures, she's not going to be taking them as a disinterested student. She's going to be sitting in that room as the person whose future role is, in no small part, a direct historical product of everything the syllabus covers. None of this means anything sinister was being hidden from her personally. There's no reporting suggesting she was ever formally barred from learning this history, and it would be inaccurate to frame it that way. What's true, and well documented, is that Spain's broader relationship with this period has long been one of careful avoidance rather than open engagement, that her own education path never required direct academic study of it, and that a rigorous political science program is about to change that in a fairly unavoidable way. That's less a hidden secret being unlocked and more a structural gap in her formation finally closing, at precisely the moment in her life when understanding it might matter most. Thank you for watching. If you found this useful, subscribe for more grounded, sourced coverage of the Spanish royal family, and let us know in the comments what you'd like covered next.